Hello. So, going to try something a little bit different today. So, a few years ago, when I was still co hosting the podcast Just Films and That, we did an episode on the Fantastic Four, and then the following week, we did an episode on Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer. So, Just Films and That is a podcast that celebrates underrated and underseen films. I chose Fantastic Four because I thought it might be underrated, and then my co host Josh chose Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer the following week because he thinks that that film is also underrated. And now I have just watched the new Fantastic Four 2025 edition, and it got me thinking about those other two films. I'd seen sort of a few comments saying that this more recent iteration of the film is what everyone's been waiting for. It's this breath of fresh air for the Fantastic Four franchise that those first two films really didn't deliver. But then I watched the more recent one and I thought, yeah, it was kind of okay. So what I thought I would do today is I'll listen back to the episode that we did on Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer whilst comparing it to the more recent Fantastic Four. I'll see what I thought of that film and compare it to how I'm feeling about the newer film. Initially, I thought that I was going to do the comparison with the first Fantastic Four film, but then I started thinking about the fact that Galactus and the Silver Surfer are obviously in this newer version of the film, so it made more sense to do the comparison with the second film. I may still touch on some thoughts and opinions that I have about the first film as well, that might just organically come across, but the podcast episode I'll be listening back to now is Rise of the Silver Surfer. So just before we get started, I just wanted to look at the IMDb scores for all three films and then the Rotten Tomatoes scores for all three films as well. These were the scores that we would look at on the podcast to try and determine if the film was underseen or underrated, and it's something that I've continued doing as I've been doing more videos on my own channel. So Fantastic Four from 2005 gets a 5.7 on IMDb, and then on Rotten Tomatoes gets 45% from the audience and 28% from the critics. Rise of the Silver Surfer gets 5.5 on IMDb, 38% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 51% from the audience, and then the most recent Fantastic Four film gets a 7 on IMDb, and then 86% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 91% from the audience. And I do take issue with the disparity in those scores. Ultimately, I don't think the most recent film is as good as those scores suggest, especially when taking into consideration how badly scored those first two films are. Just to preface this as well, I would consider myself a casual fan of superhero films. I haven't read any comic books. I don't really follow Marvel religiously. I do just watch these films for entertainment. So the review, the opinions that I'm going to be giving here is very much just from the point of view of a film audience member. I don't know much about the deeper lore. I don't have much information on the backstories of these characters. So there may be things that I get wrong and there may be things that I don't quite understand, like why certain characters are portrayed in a particular way or why certain events happen the way they do. So I'm just coming at this from the point of view as someone who is just watching the films. Okay, let's see how this goes. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to Just Films and That. This is the podcast that celebrates films we reckon might be underrated or underseen. I'm your host for this week, Alice Oliver. With me, as always, is Josh Hallam, and it was his turn to pick the film this week, and he went with Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer from 2007. So let's get to it. Bit of a fun one this week as we follow on from Fantastic Four into Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer. So very excited about that. Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer. So like I said, we did Fantastic Four last week. And then in a stroke of genius, Josh, just as we were finishing that episode, you thought, why don't we? Why don't we do it? Let's do the sequel, which also may be underrated or underseen, which is very exciting. So this film is from 2007. Spoiler warning, listeners, if you haven't seen it yet. So Josh, do tell us, what is the film about and why did you pick it?
So Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer follows on from the first Fantastic Four film, which we did last week. We find our heroes. I don't really know how long after them being the Fantastic Four it is. I think it's about the same amount of time that passed between the films, which is about a year or two. Something like that. Anyway,
not long.
They're cracking on, doing what they're doing, saving the world, being heroes. At the meantime, Reed and Sue, Mr. Fantastic, and Sue Storm are going to try and become Mr. and Mrs. Fantastic, as they are in the comics. They're trying to get married, but it keeps getting foiled by the fact that they're constantly having to save the world. At the same time, a mysterious invader from outer space turns up called the Silver Surfer and basically says that the world is going to end if they don't do something about it. In the meantime, they also have to contend with the return of their foe from the first film, the amply named Doctor Doom.
There he is. He's
With a
there again.
healthy supply of Just for Men in this version. My word, they went a shade darker with his hair. But anyway, why did I pick this one? So, well, we did Fantastic Four last week, right?
We did indeed.
Now, this was on my list anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And when you'd pick Fantastic Four, I didn't realise just how poorly rated the original Fantastic Four, as in the one that we did last week, was. I thought that one was sort of considered to be fine. I didn't think it was considered to be like amazing. I didn't think it was considered to be absolute trash. I thought it was, sort of like well received. It was okay. It was a good blockbuster. And obviously it turns out, as we saw last week, it was really poorly received. Now this I knew was poorly received. So I'm going at this, that this is underrated. And I thought, well, we did the first one last week. Why not do the second one this week? So for people who, if there's anyone out there who listens to us who really hates the Fantastic Four, we've definitely lost them.
No, they should be even more interested, because they should be desperate to know what kind of argument could we possibly make for these films that they hate. What argument can we make to why they could be underrated or underseen? Part of the fun, isn't it? I bet they're still with us. I bet they want to hear it.
So, have you seen this one before?
No, have not seen it. So I was very excited about that one.
Okay, then. Okay, so, well, what did you think then? Because I'm interested to know. Obviously, you picked it. It's an interesting one, this, because you picked last week's and I picked this week's, but they're part of the same, two films. There was obviously, they didn't make any more, so the twosome or whatever you want to call it. What did you think?
I mean, it was a definite improvement on the first one. I think it's definitely better. I think just objectively it's better. So a lot of this, I do think, is going to be a lot of comparisons to the first one. Yeah. I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. Obviously trying to look at it as its own film, but ultimately it is a sequel, and it's quite similar to the first one in the sort of vibe and the whole feel of the whole thing. But I do think this was a stark improvement. So I do think it looks pretty good most of the time. So I particularly like all the space stuff. A lot of it feels like a lot more stylish and a lot more slick than the first one. Well, there's loads of space stuff in the more recent iteration as well. That was also a point that I enjoyed about the first film, was the visuals and how much of these space scenes we get. There's loads of spaceships and stuff. Everything just looks really slick. And then in Rise of the Silver Surfer, then you've got the Silver Surfer himself and then Galactus on top of that. And that is really built on in 2025's Fantastic Four. Probably my biggest compliment of the film is the way it looks. Obviously the mise-en-scène is brilliant. They're going for that futuristic retro vibe. The buildings, the costumes, the hair, all that sort of thing. That all looks really, really good. I really enjoyed all the scenes in space. You've got the wormholes, you've got the wormhole that sort of becomes a bit of a black hole. And then Galactus, I think, looks amazing. I think you really get a good idea of the scale of him in this most recent film, and that really helps kind of emphasize how ominous and sinister he can be. And then when he eventually comes down to earth and then he's walking along and he's walking through the buildings and stuff, and I did think all that looked really good. So consistently across 3 films, I do think they look great. I like the space sci-fi look that all 3 of them have going on. I think the Fantastic Four costumes look pretty decent in all 3 of them as well. So that point is consistent across the 3 films. A lot of it feels like a lot more stylish and a lot more slick than the first one. And I feel like the quality of the visuals stands up even today, even though we're 16 years later. A lot of the visuals around
16 years.
Yes, I know, yeah. When you think about
that is absolutely disgusting.
That's like that's the
worst thing you've ever said to me on this podcast.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
The worst thing you've ever said to me on this podcast is that this film was released 16 years ago.
16 years
I remember watching this as a bug-eyed young 16-year-old chap. Watching it in the cinema, thinking, might not get better than this for comic book films.
Oh, wow. Well, there we go. Weren't you pleasantly surprised?
But I can't believe it. Sorry, as you were saying, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's fucking
okay.
disgusting.
It's disgusting. I hate you. This is the end of the podcast.
Yeah, shut up your arse, Alice. Don't ever say that to me again.
So it's interesting. So at the time, I did think that the visuals still held up. And I suppose to a degree I do, but now we've had the more recent iteration of it where the CGI and the effects and everything are so phenomenal. So it probably doesn't still hold up anymore. I reckon before this most recent film was released, they still did. But now you would probably, like if we went back and watched it now, you'd probably really be able to see how much it's dated. So I think that's probably done a real disservice to the two previous films. And if you go back and watch them now, they are probably going to look a bit trash. But when I watched these two, I think it was about 2 years ago, I thought they still look pretty decent. Done.
No, go on.
It's
What
done.
else?
Wait till I tell you about Meet Me in St. Louis, man. How I love that film.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the cinema watching Meet Me in St. Louis.
Yeah.
In,
I'm thinking it's never going to get better
it's
than this.
that musical set in St. Louis never going to get any better than this. That's what I thought to myself.
And really, did it? I'm not
Songs
sure.
about trolleys. It's a peak here. This is it.
Loved it, man. Loved it. It earned that 100% Rotten Tomatoes rating. That's right, listeners. If you didn't hear that episode, Movie in St. Louis got 100%. So a lot of the visuals around, is it oh my goodness, the Galactus?
Galactus. Yeah. So for the people who haven't seen it, Galactus is
Galactus.
Is
right.
it so in the comics?
The villain.
Galactus is like he's one of the Eternals. So a little bit. If you've seen Marvel's The Eternals,
yeah.
he's one of them. So he's just sort of. I don't know if I don't know. He's not one I know inside and out. He's either a god or a demigod or some sort of massively powerful creature, and he eats planets.
He reminded me a lot of the Celestials from the Eternals. So it's interesting what Josh says there about Galactus being an Eternal. I haven't verified that. But I'm going to trust that Josh knows what he's talking about because he knows a lot more about superheroes and comic books than I do. But if he is one of the Eternals and then he's been designed in this way so that he looks like, well, fairly similar to how the Celestials did, or how I remember the Celestials looking in the Eternals anyway. I've only seen the film once, but I did really like the design of Galactus. I think his scale and his power really came through the screen. He was a real highlight of the film for me. And that's, I guess this sort of ties into the way it looks as well. Like I said, I think the way that this year's film looks is probably the best thing about the film, and Galactus was definitely a part of that. I just always thought it was really cool when he was on screen, and he had some great lines as well. One part that really stands out to me is when he's talking to Susan and Reed about Franklin the baby, but he hasn't been born yet. He's still in utero. And Susan and Reed tell Galactus something like, oh no, we've checked him, we've done loads of tests on him and he's normal. And then Galactus says something like, he hides his true nature from you. I thought that was really, really good. That was a real standout line for me. And throughout the film, there were a couple of standout lines here and there, but in general, I didn't find the dialogue that compelling. I didn't really find some of the plot points that compelling, the script and the story development. It was all just lacking a bit of depth for me. And I actually think I found a little bit more depth in those first two films. And I didn't really expect to think that going into watching the more recent film.
In the comics, there's different versions. I like with anything, they reboot the comics and they look different. So the version in this did get a lot of criticism, which we'll come on to, because he's just a big cloud.
Sure.
But in the comics, he has been a big cloud. But in the comics, he's a guy. He's just a big old fella who literally eats planets like you or I would eat a lovely crisp apple.
Right. Oh, yeah. The whole thing around it reminded me of, oh shit, I forgot it. The thing from the Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that called?
Parallax.
Parallax.
Yeah.
So
there was obviously they released not that far apart. I mean, a lot far apart, I suppose, in like film terms, but 3 or 4 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember people saying, oh, you need to show the villain, stop showing us these big fucking clouds, and then lo and behold, we get we got Thanos and all the good Loki and
I quite like the big scary clouds. I like it. Yeah, I didn't mind the big scary cloud at the time. I did think that visually it looked quite cool because he just sort of looked like a big sort of spacey, foggy mess, and I quite liked that. And I found that quite ominous, really. He's just like this unstoppable force that's coming across the universe. And because he wasn't really anything tangible, that almost makes it more terrifying and more menacing, because it's not really something that you as a human can fully comprehend and understand when you're looking at it. But I do enjoy the recent film's iteration of Galactus a bit more, and the fact that he was able to have some of those quite powerful lines of dialogue, I think really helped with his character and really helped to convey his presence through the screen and really enable the audience to understand the kind of threat that he does pose and the powers that he possesses. And I quite like that he's this He's sort of grumpy. He's done with whatever it is that he's doing. He needs the hunger to cease and he wants to be at peace and all this thing. And I think that did all come together and made for quite a compelling character. So I will say in defense of the more recent film that depiction of Galactus I do think was very strong, and wanting to see more of that character, enjoying every time he was on screen, getting to appreciate the scale of him, that was enough to keep me interested in the film, but it wasn't enough to make it a great film. I'm sure that'll come up a bit more as we go on.
Yeah, so that's Galactus. He is a bit like Parallax, although it's not he is not displayed in this film in the traditional sense that people think of him as, which is a guy with a big purple and blue helmet on, who is a big planet eater. And the Silver Surfer in this and in the comics is his herald. So he's the guy who goes to I think he's sort of like a scout. He goes to the planets to check them out to see if he can eat them. He's like a restaurant critic, Alice.
Yeah,
he's like
is a little bit, yeah. Is this edible for my master?
And the whole deal is that, if he does that for him, he won't eat his planet.
Yeah.
Little grass, do you know what I mean? He's just a grass. But yeah, so that's the deal with that. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Big so old cloud boy.
I quite like it. I quite like the big old cloud thing, and I'm shocked that you said that some people didn't like it.
I guess it went down like a sack of shit. That.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's the main thing that people will say about this film is that they did Galactus, and they made it a big CGI cloud.
So because I haven't read the comic books, I do find that my opinions and my thoughts about superhero films do tend to differ quite drastically from what people who are more familiar with the text do enjoy. So excuse me if some of my thoughts and feelings about the film are just completely out there. But no, I appreciate that a lot of people didn't like the big smoke monster in Rise of the Silver Surfer, but I didn't mind it. But I had no expectation. I didn't know what it was meant to look like. I just saw kind of a big, cool, sparkly looking fog thing, and I thought it wasn't too bad.
I don't completely hate it. I don't completely hate it. I'd like to see.
It's scary. It's ominous.
He's a big cloud.
It's massive. It's he's what's that word for when something is so unbelievably enormous? I can't remember the word, but so in where it's like all consuming in its giganticism or whatever. Like
it's it is. I don't think it's the worst comic book decision ever made in a comic book film. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not showing it's not sewing Deadpool's mouth shut in X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's I sort of see the logic behind doing it because I wonder in this whether they thought we can't really do the big purple and blue guy justice.
Right.
Like maybe they just couldn't find a way. There are certain villains that are massive in the comics that the MCU hasn't even touched. So there have been hints towards Galactus and there have been hints towards Doctor Doom. Well, Doctor Doom and Galactus are probably the two biggest Marvel villains.
Right.
Alongside, there's a couple of others that they have touched on. But the ones they've used, so Thanos is a big villain. Mm-hmm. So if you think of that, I would say the biggest villains that sort of Marvel have are Thanos, Doctor Doom, and Galactus, right? Mm. And there are others as well, and I'm sure there will be comic books fans screaming at me as well. But the fact that they haven't got close to doing Doctor Doom and doing Galactus yet, A, it might be because obviously the Fantastic Four haven't been done yet because of licensing reasons and stuff like that. But B, it might. I just wonder if what they're trying to do is build the world like they have done, and in the meantime try and figure out how they're going to do it, because they are quite sort of daft villains. If you think of to put Loki in the MCU makes sense, and to put Thanos in the MCU makes sense, and any alien or robot you can say, but a big planet-eating alien, I think that's quite a lot. And I remember when they did Captain America, you got to bear in mind the MCU is built on a load of heroes that Marvel, the comic book company, sold off because they were going bankrupt, and they sold off what they thought were the heroes that they'd never really get much joy out of. So that's why they sold Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. And lo and behold, we're 15 years or whatever it is into the MCU now, and we've got successful franchises built off a World War II propaganda super soldier, a space Viking. Do you know what I mean? And a guy who builds himself a super suit that flies around and all that sort of stuff, as well as a guy who's bit by a spider and a guy that's an ant and all the other stuff. So I just wonder, are they waiting to to build it up and put them in, or why are they trying to figure it out? So, sort of circling back to our original point, I'm not sure the cloud thing is the stupidest thing ever. But I can also see if you went into this really excited for Galactus, you would
Yeah,
be
the
disappointed.
traditional sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. Okay, so I think that's actually giving me some insight maybe into why people do love the more recent film so much and why it has scored so well. Because if you are waiting for that depiction of Galactus, if you are waiting to see that character in a film and to actually be able to enjoy the design, enjoy the storyline around him, then I think in that regard, the more recent film does deliver on that. Again, as someone who doesn't really know the wider lore of the Fantastic Four, but I think that iteration of Galactus, it does work and it does have a massive impact. So if you had felt disappointed by the first two films, and Rise of the Silver Surfer especially, to then get this sort of iteration and this depiction of Galactus must have felt quite satisfying. So I do wonder if that's had something to do with why the film has scored so high, even though in terms of like dialogue and character depth and story development, not even necessarily the story development's fine. I think it's character development that I do think is really lacking in the more recent film. I didn't really feel connected to any of the characters. I felt like I didn't really know them. I felt like they didn't really have much of a personality. The Thing, especially, I was really let down by. Now, in the first two films, I think Michael Chiklis does a great job, and I just feel like the Thing has a personality, whereas in this more recent version, it just felt like he was just saying the lines. And I do think a huge factor is to do with it being CGI versus costume and makeup, which it was in the first two films, and that does help with the immersion, and I think it does help you connect with that character more. Whereas when it's just fully CGI, there's just like a hollowness there. And I think you can feel the detachment between the actor and the character. And that was a real shame. And I did come away from watching it not really feeling anything for any of the characters, not really knowing much about them, and just feeling like it was all a bit one dimensional. I don't think it's explored deep enough or in a good enough way to bring the viewer, or especially me as the viewer, away feeling like I connected with those characters, that I believe their relationships, I believe their friendships. And that was quite disappointing because I do look for that in my films. But I would say it is definitely more style over substance, and that's okay. Like, I love loads of films that are style over substance. I just wonder if it was lacking so much and lacking so much in the important parts that I was just unable to emotionally connect with the film in a way that I would have liked. And I do get that. And I know that people do get disappointed when maybe it strays too far from the source material or whatever. And if you're expecting something and those expectations aren't met, then that could be quite disappointing. So fair enough. But as a person who's obviously never read the comic books, my understanding and knowledge of the comic books is so like superficial.
Obviously, you've said that you didn't know loads about the comic books. Did you know about the Silver Surfer? Had you heard of him?
No, I don't think so. I'd known. Oh, does he come up? Does he come up in? Oh, this is really stupid. And again, I've grown a lot over the past couple of years in terms of my film knowledge and superhero knowledge, but yeah, I've got a lot of gaps. Just remember that, and I apologise now going into this. In WandaVision or something, or is that
No, that's
something that I'm making up?
Quicksilver.
Or Quicksilver.
Yeah, a lot of silver guys.
So then no, a lot of silver guys. So I knew that I knew that this film was like Fantastic Four and the Silver Surfer. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what he looked like, what he was about, what he stood for, anything. So no, I had no idea. But I really liked him. I thought he was a really great character, just visually and sort of what he stands for as well. I thought he comes across as very compelling after about 5 lines of dialogue. And with like some of these characters, they don't even feel that compelling after 2 films, sort of thing. Yes, so I forgot about that in Rise of the Silver Surfer, how quickly you're so intrigued by the Silver Surfer. And in this, it was sort of hard to gauge because you're already expecting that and you know what the Silver Surfer's about, you know why she's there. So I wonder if, because I already had these preconceived notions of what was going to happen, and I don't think she's that different from the one that we do see in Rise of the Silver Surfer. But I think I did maybe lack a bit of emotional connection to her. But I did quite like the flashback though, when you see her with her daughter and when Galactus does come to her in the first instance. I did quite like that. but I wonder which iteration of the Silver Surfer was better, if you can really compare the two. But I do remember the Silver Surfer in Rise of the Silver Surfer having quite a lot of impact on me very quickly, very early on from him being on screen. I remember that kind of emotional relationship and connection building quite quickly. And that didn't really happen in the newer film. I'm not too sure why. Maybe I'll go back and check at some point to see if it was an issue with the dialogue. Because in Rise of the Silver Surfer, you see him blowing away. He blows away Doctor Doom or something. Doesn't he have a confrontation with Doctor Doom or something? And then that's quite impactful. And you get quite a good sense of his power quite early on as he's flying through the air. And I think he's sort of when he's gliding over the water and stuff. Interesting. But yeah, I think that might be something to revisit actually, to really, really dissect the two different versions of the Silver Surfers and see the strengths and weaknesses of both of those depictions. So I really liked him. He sort of visually reminded me a bit of a cross between the T-1000 and Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen. Definitely T-1000 vibes in this as well. I think there was a moment, was it when she was getting sucked into the black hole and she really stretched out, and it was so similar to when the T-1000 in Terminator 2 has fallen into the lava and he's becoming loads of different shapes and faces and stuff. It really felt like that. And obviously I thought it felt like that in Rise of the Silver Surfer as well. So that's interesting that has crossed, that feeling about that character is crossing over between the two films. Because I think just the Silver Surfer, just as he is, wouldn't necessarily make me think of the T-1000, but it's some of the things that happen to him, and I think in some of the ways he moves, it really does. It feels quite liquid, and I think in the more modern film, in this year's film, it definitely feels like that.
So anyway, what else? What else did you like?
So I do feel like the whole story, the idea, the vision, whatever you want to call it, it all feels a lot more focused in this film than in the first one, and just a lot more clearer. I think it's more obvious what the characters want and what their motivations are, why people are doing certain things, which is just obviously just some basic expectations that you have when you watch a film, is that all that stuff is nice and clear for you. But because I feel like the first one was lacking a bit in those areas, it was just kind of a bit of relief that it was in this one, and then they sort of learned from their mistakes. I do definitely think there was focus to this more recent film, and for the most part, the way the story developed did make sense. I don't think it was necessarily the most compelling or the most exciting or the most in-depth story that we've seen, and in terms of superhero films as well, not necessarily, the most in-depth or emotionally charged that we've seen, even though there were some emotional beats in there. But there was something that I appreciated about Rise of the Silver Surfer compared to the first one, which didn't really feel particularly focused, and it felt like there was loads of different threads going on that didn't quite get explored perhaps as in-depth as they should have done. In this year's film, I think it did feel pretty focused. I just feel like the script around the characters, around the main characters, the dialogue that they share, it's all just a bit surface level. You don't really get to significant understanding of who they are as people. And it's not just them, it's a lot of the side characters and the extras as well. I didn't really feel like there was much depth to anything. So I've been talking about The Chair Company on my channel recently, and one of my biggest compliments about that is that all the side characters feel like they have a character profile, they have an in-depth character profile, that the creators of the show know exactly who these people are, they know what they like, they know what their past is, they know what their childhood was like, they know what their hobbies are, that sort of thing. They know all about like their mannerisms and their little quirks or whatever it is. But in Fantastic Four, I just didn't feel that with anyone. It was like people were just turning up on the day to read their script and that was it. I feel like there was a real lack of depth for the side characters, and that is something that I think is so important and that can really help with the immersion of a film or a TV show. Some of the performances I thought were better in this as well. Not amazing, but certainly an improvement. There's a bit of more kind of relationship development between Johnny and Reed, which I quite enjoyed, and at times I found that quite funny and quite endearing. And I felt more invested in those two as a pairing than I did in Reed and Susan, to be quite honest.
Into the
I've just
people
had
who are
like
getting
two
married.
films. So a huge problem that I had with the first two films was the relationship with Reed and Susan. It always just felt a little bit forced. I didn't feel any type of way about them at all. Whereas in the new film, I do find that relationship a lot more believable. I think a lot of it has to do with the way Susan's been written in the new film. She is a lot more confident. She seems a lot more secure in herself and in her relationship with Reed. I feel like in the first two films, she feels quite insecure about her relationship with Reed. And, you know, she's just sort of desperate to get married and it has to happen straight away. And I feel like that makes you sense a bit of insecurity in her, and it feels like, well, what's the rush? Whereas in this, I think because they're a lot more established and you can see more of an emotional connection between the two, and you do sense that they have a bit more history. So I would definitely say, in support of the new film, that Reed and Susan's relationship is a lot stronger and I think is a lot more believable. And I believe Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby a lot more than I did Jessica Alba and Ioan Gruffudd. It's just been like two films of that relationship being forced down our throats, and I just don't really, like, I don't feel it at all. But I'll come on to that in the dislikes probably a little bit more. What were kind of the key things for you in this then, especially watching it this time around, that you thought, actually, that is excellent or that is really good?
Yeah, I enjoyed it just as much this time. I did enjoy it. I do enjoy it more than the first one. I think the first one is a little, it's fine. Like we touched that on that last week, but I do think it's a little bland and a little formulaic, which I think they do a little bit more in this, which I really like. I think it works well as a sequel. So I know that sounds probably like a silly thing to say, but these things don't often work as sequels. Sometimes they keep them as standalone films and sometimes they follow on and all that sort of stuff. So there's some good character development like you've already touched on. So, for example, in the first one, Ben Grimm gets a lot more play in terms of him dealing with being the Thing, whereas in this one, Johnny gets a little bit more of a story arc in terms of growing up and coming into himself and being a little bit less of a cocky sort of playboy. There's some good ideas in it as well. So things like, what's the big thing that everyone associates, particularly with the Fantastic Four, is that they are pretty much a family and that they work as a team. And you see that in this. I really like that in this.
And I think that's maybe what's missing for me with the Thing in the newer film. And it's tricky because obviously we meet the Fantastic Four in this film. They've already been the Fantastic Four for 4 years. So Ben's obviously got over some of his insecurities and his frustrations at being the Thing. But then I think because he doesn't really display much of a personality beyond that, or just much of a personality at all, I just really struggled to connect with him. And that was a real surprise, I think, coming from the first two films, where I think you do connect with him. And I do think he has some really great moments. I think he has some lovely interactions with some of the other characters. Reed obviously tries really hard to, make his life better and help him see the bright side and all that sort of thing. And you don't get that in this, but it's because it's not about that story, is it? Because, like I said, with the new film, we're already 4 years in. They've gone through all that turmoil already. But then you need to give me some character depth elsewhere then. If we're not going to see the challenges that Ben faces by becoming the Thing and the initial shock of that happening and why that's so devastating for him, you need to give me something else. I would have liked to have seen something else for that character, but you don't really see anything, I don't think. We'll move on now then to talking about anything that we didn't like about the film, or perhaps anything that we would change. So go on, Josh. I reckon there's probably a few things between us.
There's a couple of things. So first and foremost, I'm interested to know what you think of this, but fucking dance scene. The dance scene at the stag do or bachelor party.
Oh, yeah. So there's a dance scene and it's all about Reed kind of stretching around ladies and stuff, and that's just very specific to Rise of the Silver Surfer. I don't think there's anything really that you could compare with the more recent film.
As they call it in America.
I can't
Reed
even remember.
dances and he uses his powers to dance.
Oh, a lot, and he's like twisting around the ladies, and then Jessica Alba walks in and sees it.
I just was like, didn't need it. Mm-hmm. Didn't need that scene at all. It's almost like that's the sort of thing that someone comes up with and no one goes, that doesn't really fit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? No one will say no to the person who's suggesting it because it's usually someone in control or power or whatever.
So then I think I would say in defence of the new film that I don't feel like anything did happen that just felt completely out of place and that felt like it didn't really belong in the world. Actually, what I will say is the idea of Susan going into space to confront Galactus when she's very heavily pregnant, like nearly to full term, so unrealistic. I was like, there's no way. There's no way she'd go. There's no way she'd go. Absolutely bonkers to do that. But I think aside from that, I think everything that happened in the film, in the new Fantastic Four, even if I didn't necessarily like it or not, or I felt like there wasn't much of an impact, it did all feel like it would fit within the film. There was nothing that really felt out of place, I don't think.
So what did you think of that scene? So I didn't know if you'd say, oh no, actually I didn't mind that scene, or it's just a bit, yeah.
I mean, I didn't even remember it. I literally didn't even remember it.
Right, so it didn't have an effect on you then.
So yeah, I don't think it impacted me at all. Okay. But it's almost like they took out all the stuff of Susan Storm being kind of almost naked all the time and having to do that, but turning invisible, but then becoming not invisible again with her underwear and stuff, all that. They sort of took that out, but then had to put this in, right? So obviously that wasn't a factor at all in the new film because her powers just work so differently in the new film, and I don't think, and it seemed like she was able to control the visibility of whatever she was wearing, so that just didn't come across at all. So then I suppose in the new film there really isn't much of a sexualization of Sue Storm. We're not really looking too much at her through the male gaze, I wouldn't think, or at least I didn't think that while I was watching it. And that was definitely a factor in those first two films. So that's interesting, and I hadn't considered that until just now. We've got to have some ladies doing some sexy stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Sexy ladies, haven't you? Like, who is going to go and watch a film without sexy ladies or sexy men in it, Alice?
Exactly. You know what I mean? Well, exactly. That
what a waste of money. So that brings me nicely to my next point, which is Sue, which is I just don't think she's given as much to do in this. I remember watching the first one for last week's episode, and I'd falsely remembered that they didn't give her loads to do, and that she was there to be a bit of a damsel in distress and to get her kit off because she had to turn invisible and stuff like that. But actually, I was pleasantly surprised last week because I do think they made her the sort of emotional heart of the team, the driving force of the team, keeping the other three in line, sort of thing. So and she had that emotional connection with the villain as well. So I remember thinking that last week. Whereas in this, the only defining thing I can think about her role in this film is two things. One, the Silver Surfer doesn't do something to her because she looks like his girlfriend.
No, yeah.
And the other one
that's a real Martha moment, isn't it?
Martha. And the other thing is she just wants to get married.
So I do definitely prefer the version of Susan that we get in the new film. She feels a lot more independent, a lot more secure, which I think I've already said. And even though her main driver is this want to be a mother and then being a mother, which is obviously a very feminine, a very female-focused aspect of her personality, somewhat similar to the fact that she's absolutely desperate to get married in Rise of the Silver Surfer, it's handled a lot better, and there is some emotional depth to it that I do think we get. And I do think the baby is unbelievably cute, and such a risk to kind of bring in a baby as a main character. I know sometimes it was CGI, but sometimes it looked like it was a real baby, so I'm pretty sure it was a real baby. And Franklin does kind of become a bit of a central character, so he's there a lot. I feel like that's really risky. I think you really risk kind of isolating a good part of your audience and, just leaving them feeling a bit like, why is this baby on screen all the time? Because sometimes it can be hard to connect to child actors or much younger actors as an adult because you haven't got much common ground. But I do think it worked in the newer film, and I think it did let us see this quite strong and maternal side to Susan, whereas in the previous films she never really felt maternal in that way, and I think a lot of her feminine energy was coming out in quite a negative way, and it just seemed like all she wanted was to get married. She was just desperate to get married all the time. Like, it's all she really talked about. All her kind of narrative drivers and all her plot points were to do around the fact that she wanted to get married and finally having the wedding and the wedding getting cancelled and all this sort of thing. So in the new film, Susan, definitely a stronger character, definitely more enjoyable to watch.
Because as we know, Alice, that's all women want.
It's all
It's
women
everything.
want. I've told you this, Josh.
You just want
I've told
bloody, you just want to get married, don't you? That's all you want, all of you. I've asked every single one of you. So yeah, I was I'd forgotten just how much it was her getting upset that she wasn't getting married.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a touch of that with this. Then the other thing as well, that just to finish on, is that the Silver Surfer should be in it more.
Yeah, I agree.
To call it the rise of the Silver Surfer, well, he doesn't. There's no rise involved. He's powerful when he gets there, and that's it.
Yeah, what is the rise? That is a very good point.
Yeah,
what is the rise?
It
What's
should
he
just be
rising
called.
from?
They could have just called it the Fantastic Four and the Silver Surfer.
And the Silver Surfer.
Yeah, the arrival of the Silver Surfer.
Because at the very end, because at the end, he's sort of unconscious, floating through space. You think he's dead, and then he kind of wakes up, doesn't he?
He does the whole sacrifice
That's the rise
thing,
of the Silver Surfer, that end split second of the film, right? That's what you're talking about.
And that's the tease of the film they obviously never made. But anyway, that's about it from me. But, a couple of things there that do drag it down a little bit, which could have probably been fixed. What about you then? I bet you've got a couple of bits to say. Is it that there's not enough wedding stuff in it because you love weddings?
No, there's not enough. I want it to be all about that. She should have married the Silver Surfer. It should have been called The Marriage of the Silver Surfer.
Looking at plates, looking at the menu, looking at the DJ. Yeah,
I want all of it. So the script, the dialogue, the delivery, all of that, it's not great, right? So it is certainly an improvement on the first film, but it's still not amazing. And I think overall that is the biggest problem with this film for me. And then bouncing off that, I really don't give a shit about Reed and Susan. I really don't about their relationship. Their relationship is such a huge focus of both these films, and I could not care less. Like, we are not given anywhere near enough backstory of the two of them to be invested in them as a couple. And considering how time-consuming their relationship is in these films, I need like a 10-minute prologue of the two of them years ago, getting together, enjoying each other, then breaking up in heart-wrenching conditions or something, right? You can't just start this story by being like, oh yeah, these two used to be together, then they broke up, but then they still like each other and they'll get back together eventually and all this. I was like, you can't just tell me that. I need to see it. I need to feel it. I need to care about these characters. There was like the occasional time where it reminded me a little bit of Tony Stark and Pepper Potts, except just done much worse. And I think that part of the problem with this film and with the film in general is that there's so little show don't tell throughout both films. Everything is told to the audience in explicit terms. There is no reading between the lines. And I would say that is the same for the new film as well. I don't think there's any nuance. There is no reading between the lines. There is no show, don't tell, everything that I've just said then. It's all just spoon-fed to you, and it's all just told to you, and it's all just characters offloading all the information that you need. And I don't think anything is really left open to interpretation, and you're not given many sort of visual or audio clues into how people might be feeling or to how they've got to where they are now. It's all very overt. And I do like something that's a bit more subtle with maybe a bit more nuance. But I get that, it's a big flashy superhero film. That's not necessarily always appropriate. So, but I think things like that just stop me from being able to connect with a film on a significant emotional level. There's no subtle language or body language or reactions, etc., to indicate that something is deeper, than it seems on surface level. You just get told as the audience, we used to be together, now we're trying to make it work, and you should care about this and feel emotionally invested. Well, I'm not, and it just grew tiresome. Like, I just did not care about that. I cared more, like I said before, about Reed and Johnny. Their relationship was more fun, it was more endearing, because it just always feels like Susan comes on screen and she's like, well, Reed, you were the reason that this, and this. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, but we can be together because I love you so much and all this. And I was just, it was just boring.
Yeah, and I think there doesn't, for me, it's a bit of a throwback to when this sort of love interest / relationship device was used in every, not just comic book film, but every blockbuster film to try and you put two actors together and hope that they sparkle and all that sort of stuff, and to bring a touch of romance or emotional depth to the story. But even if you look at both films together, there is no reason why they couldn't have just already been together.
And that is what we do get in this one. And to join the story where their relationship is already established and their powers have already been established. We're 4 years later after everything's gone on. Not only do Reed and Susan seem secure in their relationship and happy with each other, but they're trying for a baby, and then she does get pregnant. So I do think that is a strength in the new film. And I think it does make those two characters a bit more compelling. And it means we can ignore this kind of will they, won't they thing. And I feel like those sort of storylines only work when you do have a deep emotional connection to characters, but then that means we need to see some more backstory, some more compelling plot points of why we think as the audience, the audience should think that these characters should be together, and you don't get that in the first two films. So I think starting the film off where they do in the new Fantastic Four, I do think that was the right move. And I don't really see how they could have made a better attempt at that. And so I will give it that. I do think that was the right move. Mm-hmm.
Like it could have already been married. It just doesn't need to be there, does it? That the drive and the whole thing of their wedding and stuff. It just doesn't need to. It doesn't need to be there.
I don't really know who all that was for in Rise of the Silver Surfer. I don't know which audience members they were trying to entertain and appease with all the wedding talk and all the wedding drama, because it was just exhausting and boring and tiresome. It didn't help with immersion or entertainment. It didn't really help to delve in deeper to the characters. I didn't enjoy it then. I don't enjoy it now, and I'm glad that was left alone in the new film.
The thing in this could have been, because it's hinted at, they sort of they try and fit a bit too much into it, don't they? With the whole, well, if we have kids, this isn't a normal life. Well, that could have been the emotional part of the story. And instead, it's just sort of thrown away, picked back up again, and thrown away. It's like, well, how do we raise kids in this life? Never mentioned again. And then I thought you two were going off. Yeah, well, what's a normal life anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me as well, I'd be interested to get your opinion. One thing I noticed watching both of them this time around, do Ewan Griffith and Jessica Alba, do they work together? Like, do they have much chemistry? Do you buy them as a couple?
No, well, I don't.
Because I don't think I do.
I assumed that it was because of the writing around them. I thought it was just because the script around them is quite weak, because they're using really basic language and tropes and techniques to really force this connection and to get you as the audience to really care about them and be rooting for them. But it just doesn't work. So I don't know if it's performance or if it's the writing, or if maybe it's a bit of both. I don't know, but it's not like I just don't care. I really just don't care. Like, and it's not that I'm incapable of caring. Like, I love a good, love story, sort of where it's appropriate and when it's well written, but I just didn't give a fuck. Sorry for the language. about their relationship at all. So then when you've got so much of the film devoted to the fact that they keep trying to get married and it keeps getting messed up, I was like, oh, I don't care. It's like, oh, we're back in these scenes again. No, I don't give a shit. And it was just such a huge part of the film. And I just think maybe, like I said, a well-written, maybe 10-minute prologue at the very, very beginning that shows something happening between them, develops that relationship, gives their feelings towards each other meaning. Maybe something happened and one of them had to make a really tough decision as to why they couldn't be together or something. Do you know what I mean? There's so many ways to do it, and they just didn't do it. And it really lets the film down, I think. All right, so we'll move on now then to talking about the critical reception. So I haven't seen this, and you think this is underrated?
I do.
I definitely think this is better than the first one. So I will take that into consideration. So I think the lowest score for the first one was around 28% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes.
I've got it here. Do you want me to tell you what the average for the first one was?
Yeah.
So the average for the first one was 43% or 4 and a bit out of 10.
Okay, so I definitely think this is going to be higher. Probably not loads. So I reckon I'd probably give this one like a high 5.
Okay.
I reckon it maybe got a little less than that, and I'll say it got a low 5. I'll say that this got a 5.2 or a 52. Is where I'm going to sit with that.
So that would be underrated in your eyes?
That would be a little bit underrated for me, yeah.
Okay. So at the time of recording, then over on IMDb, gets 5.6 out of 10.
Okay. So I'm sort of leaning with them there.
Not too bad. Rotten Tomatoes, the audience, they give it a very similar 51%.
Oh, okay.
Then we head over to the critics, and they give it 38%. Which averages out at 48% or 4.8 out of 10. So is that underrated then?
Yes, I do think that's underrated. And I'm not, given how sort of low the first one was scored, I'm not totally surprised at those ratings. I do think, were you? Yeah.
So I thought this did worse than the first. I thought the first one, didn't I, was sort of not well received, but middling. And I thought this was really poorly received. So the fact that this actually did better, I was surprised. You don't often see the second one doing better than the first one in these sorts of scenarios. So I was surprised by that. But yeah, so you're saying underrated then?
I do think that's underrated. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think so. It's not, it's not amazing, but for me, it's a solid 6 out of 10 film.
So like I said at the beginning, the main reason that I wanted to get on here and do this is that I just don't think that the massive scores that the new film is getting is fair when compared to the scores of the first 2 films, because in terms of character depth and dialogue and an emotional connection to the characters and the story, it's not loads better than those first 2 films. Something that happened when Rings of Power came out is I watched that and I hated it so much that it made me like the Hobbit films so much more. So I love the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I was always kind of lukewarm with the Hobbit. I would enjoy them because it's just more Lord of the Rings stuff, more Gandalf, more Legolas. But they never really wowed me. I never thought they were great films. I think the use of the CGI really impacts my enjoyment of them. It impacts the immersion, your connection to the characters and what they're going through and all this. And it was just, they always had like some weaknesses for me. But, I could enjoy them well enough. But then seeing Rings of Power and seeing actually how wrong you can get it made me appreciate the Hobbit films a lot more. And I feel like seeing Fantastic Four, the new one, has actually made me appreciate those first 2 films a lot more. I really don't think it's as good as the scores are suggesting. So what is it? So it's 7 on IMDb, 86% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 91% from the audience. I'm just wondering what they're seeing. I am wondering what they're seeing because, like I said, some of the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are all about how this one kind of essentially craps all over those first 2 films. And I really don't think that's the case. It looks fantastic. We've got between 17 to 20 years of CGI advancements and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it is going to look better. And I think visually what they've been able to achieve is incredibly impressive. But as a story, as compelling characters, as relationship development, really caring about what you're seeing, it just wasn't there for me in this. But maybe I'm missing the point. Like I said, I'm not necessarily a huge Fantastic Four fan. I don't read comic books. I don't really follow the Marvel films in a passionate way. I'm just quite a casual viewer. I really enjoy the films, but I don't know much about the wider lore around them. So maybe it is doing something. Maybe it is connecting with those comic book fans in a way that I'm just missing out on. And obviously that's fine. But I would just like to know, because it is not that much better with those scores. If we compare the first one, 28% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, Silver Surfer, 38% from the critics, and then 86% from the critics for the new one. I don't really get it. I don't really get it. So that's why I wanted to come on here and do this video. That's why I wanted to listen back to our Just Films in that episode of Rise of the Silver Surfer. Maybe that was entertaining for you. I have no idea. But I'm glad I did it. And if they remake any of the other films we've done episodes on in the past, then maybe I'll do a similar thing with that. But anyway, that's it from me for now. But I'll be back soon with more thoughts on things that I've watched. Bye.